November 19, 2024, Jaguar releases a video on social media and announces a complete rebrand of the company. A new logo. Production of its current models is stopped. Then, on December 3rd, they unveil a new car to the world, and in that very moment, people realize they've lost yet another legendary automobile. Sales collapse by 97%. At that point, it becomes the biggest failure of the year. And that's when I started thinking, has something like this ever happened before in the history of the American auto industry? As it turns out, yes, and more than once. Today you'll find out how Ford in the late 1950s created an entirely new car brand and shut it down just 2 years later after suffering massive losses. How General Motors in the 1990s built its first mass-produced electric car and ended up losing public trust because of it. How Pontiac created one of the ugliest cars in automotive history and then went bankrupt. How Chrysler, with the help of Maserati, effectively closed the door on its own path into the luxury segment, and how a man who spent his entire career saving automotive brands failed to save his own. You're watching Jescar. Here, it's only about cars. Let's go. In 1957, Ford did something almost no one before them had dared to do. They didn't just launch a new model, they created an entirely new automobile brand, separate, independent, with its own name, design, marketing, and philosophy. That brand was called Edsel, named after Edsel Ford, the son of Henry Ford. At the time, America was living through the peak of automotive optimism. The economy was growing, suburbs were expanding, and cars were selling by the millions. Ford wanted to occupy the space between its mass-market models and the more expensive vehicles offered by General Motors. The logic seemed rock solid. If GM had multiple brands for different budgets, Ford should do the same. Enormous resources were poured into Edsel. It became one of the most thoroughly researched automotive projects of its era. Marketers ran surveys, focus groups, studied consumer desires. Everything was done by the book. On top of that, the Edsel advertising campaign became one of the largest in American automotive history. The car wasn't shown in advance, creating an aura of mystery. The public was promised a car of the future, not just a new vehicle, a revolution. Expectations were inflated to the absolute limit. And then, in September 1957, Edsel was finally revealed to the public. Almost immediately, it became clear. Something had gone wrong. The design caused confusion. The vertical grille, meant to be the brand's signature feature, sparked anything but futuristic associations. The car looked strange, unfamiliar, even awkward. It didn't feel premium, but it didn't feel mass market either. People couldn't understand what it was trying to be. And the problem wasn't just the styling. Edsel was trapped between segments. For mainstream buyers, it was too expensive and too confusing. For wealthier customers, it wasn't prestigious enough. It lacked a clear identity. Buyers simply didn't understand why they needed this car when Ford, Mercury, and Cadillac already existed. Quality issues made things even worse. Edsel vehicles were assembled at multiple Ford plants, and rush production led to poor quality control. Cars left factories with defects, misaligned panels, poorly tuned components. For a brand marketed as the car of the future, this was fatal. But the biggest mistake went even deeper. Ford created Edsel based on numbers, research, and charts, but missed one crucial thing. It failed to understand the human side. The car made sense on paper, but felt cold and alien in real life. Buyers didn't fall in love with it. And in America, without emotional connection, a car simply doesn't survive. Sales were disastrous. Instead of hundreds of thousands of units, Edsel sold far below expectations. Within a year, it was clear the project couldn't be saved. In 1959, the brand was officially shut down, having existed for barely 2 years. Ford's financial losses were estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars at the time, which would equal billions today. But even more important than the money was the legacy. The name Edsel became a permanent symbol of failure, a reminder that even the biggest company can be wrong if it believes too deeply in systems and stops listening to reality. Edsel became a lesson for the entire industry. It proved that you can't create a car with marketing alone. You can't invent it on a whiteboard. You have to understand it. And that's why the story of Edsel is still remembered every time an automaker chooses abstract ideas over real people. If Ford walked away from the Edsel disaster with only financial losses, General Motors faced something far worse. In the early 1990s, General Motors was an absolute giant, the largest automaker in the world, a symbol of American industrial power. But inside the company, it was already clear the future was changing. Environmental concerns, new regulations, growing interest in alternative energy, all of it could no longer be ignored. And GM decided to take a step that, at the time, seemed bold and even progressive. That step was the GM EV1, the company's first mass-produced electric car, and one of the first production EVs in history. It's important to understand the context. This was the early 90s. Electric cars were seen as experiments, toys, or pure utopia. But GM took the project seriously. The EV1 received an ultra-aerodynamic body, lightweight materials, and a carefully engineered design. For its time, it was a technological marvel. The car was quiet, smooth, and produced zero emissions. People who drove it were genuinely impressed, and most unexpectedly, demand appeared. The EV1 could not be purchased. It was only available through leasing, and GM controlled every single car. Yet waiting lists grew. EV1 drivers formed communities, defended the car, demanded the program continue. Many said it was the best car they had ever driven. And it was exactly at this moment that what would later be called one of the darkest chapters in automotive history began. In the late 90s, General Motors suddenly announced that the EV1 program was being shut down. The official reasons sounded vague: high cost, lack of infrastructure, weak market interest. But reality looked very different. Cars that were already in customers' hands began to be forcibly taken back. People protested. EV1 owners begged GM to sell them their cars. They were willing to sign any paperwork, waive warranties, take full responsibility. But the company refused. Most EV1s were simply destroyed. Fully functional cars were sent to the crusher. Only a handful survived, and even those had their powertrains disabled. This was a turning point. For the first time, the public saw a major corporation deliberately destroy its own working technology. Not because it didn't function, but because it threatened the existing system. Oil interests, service-based economics, dependence on internal combustion, all of that mattered more than the future, and trust was lost. For years afterward, GM was seen as a company afraid of change. This story later inspired the now legendary documentary Who Killed the Electric Car? And the title speaks for itself. The irony is brutal. Years later, the industry moved to electric cars anyway. Tesla, new startups, regulatory pressure, it all happened. But GM was no longer the pioneer. It was playing catch-up. The EV1 could have made GM the leader of a new era. Instead, it became the symbol of a missed opportunity. And unlike Edsel, which remained simply a failed brand, the EV1 story cut much deeper. It changed how people viewed corporations. It showed that even when technology is ready, it doesn't mean it will be allowed to survive. This wasn't a failed car, it was a failure of trust. After the EV1 story, it feels like things couldn't possibly get any worse. But in the early 2000s, GM managed to make another major mistake. This time not a technological one, but a reputational disaster. And the blow landed on a brand that was once a symbol of youth, performance, and driving emotion. We're talking about Pontiac. By the early 2000s, Pontiac found itself in a strange position. In the 60s and 70s, it was the emotional brand inside General Motors. GTO, Firebird, Trans Am, Pontiac stood for speed, design, and attitude. But by the late 90s, all of that began to fade. Platforms were increasingly shared, models started to look the same, and Pontiac slowly lost a clear identity. GM knew the brand needed a reset, something fresh, something young, something bold, and that's how the Pontiac Aztek was born. It was never meant to be a joke or a provocation, quite the opposite. The Aztek was designed as a car for a new generation, a crossover for active people. Travel, camping, sports, lifestyle. In the early 2000s, this direction looked promising. The idea itself wasn't the problem, the execution was. When the Aztek was unveiled, the reaction was instant and brutal. The car looked strange. Broken lines, a massive front end, awkward proportions, as if the design had been stitched together from several unrelated cars with no single vision. It wasn't aggressive, it wasn't sporty, and it definitely wasn't attractive. The Aztek became a punchline almost overnight. Automotive journalists tore it apart in reviews. The public turned it into memes and caricatures. It was labeled one of the ugliest cars in automotive history. And worst of all, that image stuck not only to the model, but to the Pontiac brand as a whole. And here's the irony. Technically, the Aztek wasn't a disaster. It was practical, spacious. It had genuinely clever ideas. A built-in cooler, a tent attachment, a modular cargo area. But none of that mattered anymore. The design erased everything else. Sales collapsed. Pontiac had expected tens of thousands of units per year. Reality was far harsher. The Aztek sold poorly from day one, and trust in the brand kept eroding. Pontiac stopped being associated with excitement. It became associated with the Aztek. And this is the key point. The Aztek was not the sole reason Pontiac died, but it became the symbol. It showed that GM no longer understood what made Pontiac special, that the brand had lost its direction, that emotion had been replaced by compromises, cost-cutting, and confused experiments. A few years later, the 2008 financial crisis delivered the final blow. General Motors was forced to cut brands and assets. Pontiac was one of the names marked through elimination. In 2010, Pontiac was officially shut down. And then history, it remains not only as the home of the GTO and Firebird, but also as the brand that gave the world the Aztek. The most ironic part? Years later, the Aztek gained a second life in pop culture thanks to Breaking Bad. Walter White's car became a meme, a symbol of mediocrity, frustration, and inner collapse, and it fit the car perfectly. Pontiac didn't die because it made one bad car. It died because it lost the understanding of who it was supposed to be. The Aztek just put the final dot. If Pontiac was suffering from an identity crisis, Chrysler in the late 80s had a different problem, an inferiority complex. The company wanted into the luxury segment, fast, loud, and without taking the long road. At that time, Chrysler was seen as a reasonable American brand. Practical cars, fair prices, solid sales, but in the premium world, no one took Chrysler seriously. That space was ruled by Cadillac, Lincoln, and the Europeans, and Chrysler decided, if you don't have status, you buy it. So in the late 1980s, Chrysler entered a partnership with Maserati. On paper, the idea looked perfect. Italian luxury, a sporty image, a prestigious name, a joint project that was supposed to open the doors of the luxury world for Chrysler. That's how the Chrysler TC by Maserati was born. And this is where everything went wrong. The TC by Maserati was conceived as a premium convertible. It was meant to be an alternative to the Mercedes-Benz SL and other luxury coupes of the era. But in reality, the car turned out to be a strange mix of an American foundation and an Italian badge. Visually, it looked far too ordinary. No boldness, no Italian passion, no sense of exclusivity. Essentially, it was a lightly reworked Chrysler LeBaron with a Maserati logo. Then came the technical issues. Italian assembly, complicated logistics, inconsistent quality. The cars were expensive yet unreliable. Customers looking for luxury didn't understand what they were paying for. And Maserati enthusiasts didn't see the TC as a real Italian car. The price was another blow. The TC by Maserati cost more than many German competitors, but offered neither performance nor prestige nor a strong image. It ended up trapped between two worlds, too expensive for Chrysler customers and too American for those who wanted a Maserati. Sales collapsed. Chrysler had planned to sell tens of thousands of units. In reality, only a few thousand were ever sold. The project was quietly shut down, and the company tried to forget it as quickly as possible. But the consequences were far more serious. This failure effectively closed the door to the luxury segment for Chrysler for many years. The brand lost credibility. The attempt to buy prestige turned into a reputational hit. Chrysler learned a hard lesson. Luxury can't be acquired with a logo, it has to be earned over decades. And Maserati? For them, the project was a stain as well. The brand became associated with a car that didn't reflect its philosophy. Maserati looked like a hired contractor, not a maker of exclusive sports cars. In the end, everyone lost. Chrysler didn't become a luxury brand, Maserati didn't strengthen its image, and the TC by Maserati went down in history as an example of how a partnership without a shared philosophy can destroy the ambitions of both sides. It was an attempt to enter the elite through the back door, and the market didn't forgive it. And at the end of this video, I wanted to talk about one man who, throughout his entire career, seemed to do the impossible. He would arrive at automotive companies at the exact moment of crisis, when everything was already going downhill, and pull them back from the edge. He made tough decisions, cut what didn't work, changed strategies, and saved brands that others had already written off. Ford, Chrysler, even entire automotive alliances. His name always appeared where order had to be restored urgently and where a business needed a second chance. But the story becomes truly ironic at the moment when this man decided to do something he had never done before: create his own company. Without heritage, without old brands, without someone else's mistakes to fix. Just his name, his experience, and his vision. And that's where everything went differently. When I started digging deeper into this story, it became clear. It's too big and too important to squeeze into the ending of a single video. This isn't just another failure. It's a story about how experience doesn't always guarantee success, how the market can be ruthless even to legends, and why saving other people's companies is sometimes easier than building your own from scratch. So we'll leave this story for a separate conversation, because it deserves a separate video. All of these stories are different in form, era, and cause. Some failed because of strategy, some because they tried too hard to chase the market, some because they wanted to buy status instead of earning it. But they all share one thing. None of these failures happened because the companies didn't understand what they were doing. They happened because the automotive industry is not just about numbers, technology, and marketing. It's also about timing, identity, and honesty with your audience. The moment a brand loses itself, the market responds instantly, without forgiving big names, beautiful promises, or legendary pasts. That's exactly why these stories matter. They remind us that even the greatest brands can stumble, and sometimes a single wrong decision is enough to erase years of success. Thank you all for watching this video. If you want to see more deep automotive breakdowns like this, I'd really appreciate your support for the channel. Love cars. Respect them. And I'm not saying goodbye because I'll see you in the next video.